Hey guys, what is up? Kid here of Burn One with the Shadowverse Evolve channel, bringing you another deck profile for Omens Eternal. This time it's on Discard Control Abyss. This is the deck I've been playing a lot of recently. It's a lot of fun. It has some interesting lines, and you get to be the hand-ripped terrorist that everyone has to fear at every locals. So let's just get right into the deck profile itself. All right, so here's the list. We'll just kind of jump right into it. We're playing a control list. We're playing Bellringer Angel. We don't have a lot of really good one drops. Bellringer Angel at least, gives us a ward, draws us a card, and we play one of the Evo as always to be able to hit something, basically a snipe on a body. Sometimes we combine this with snipe and angelic snipe to hit a 4-drop or 4 health faller, that is. And card's good. I mean, we've been playing it for quite a while. You understand if you're in a slower game plan, Bellringer is pretty strong. Angelic Snipe, I think this is a card that most decks should be playing this meta. It answers a lot of things on 1 and 2. It hits a lot of things that people are playing right now. It's a card worth definitely finding slots for, in my opinion, in almost every deck. Punk Devil, he's still here. Really great card. Still does a lot of work. Randomly getting Bane to, making awkward attacks for your opponent is really big. And a lot of times the cost of using the gaining the Bane effect isn't that bad, because on death this card heals you too. So it basically costs nothing essentially to activate the Bane effect when you do need it. 3 surefire bullets. We are a control deck. We want to control the board. A lot of 4 drops or 4 health followers on Evo running around still. A lot of Alice's we want to target. Eggs we want to target. Things like that. Easily answers those things. Next, we have a dual use card here. It has 2 great effects on here. The first effect is each opponent discards a random card, which is pretty big on 2. If their opponent doesn't really present any threats early on, you can play this on curve if you want to start removing options from their hand. The secondary effect, it does act as removal. You select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 3 damage. Later in the game, when you draw this, it kind of 2-for-1s in a way. It deals damage to an enemy follower and forces your opponent to discard a card. A lot of times in the later game, though, the discard doesn't matter as much, because a lot of times that at that point your opponent is already on top deck mode. But if you happen to run into Thief Sword, for example, and they mill out your deck early on, this becomes alive a lot sooner than later, which lets you 2-for-1 a lot of things early on. Crazed Executioner is back. I love this card. I know some people are playing, I think it's called Nice Nature, the one that doesn't take an Evo slot. If you value the Evo slot, you probably play Nice Nature. I personally value being able to hand up the exact card I want to pull out of my opponent's hand with 2 of the Evos here. On Evo, deal 2 damage to your leader. Select an opponent, you reveal their hand, select a card in their hand, and the opponent discards that card. This gives you a lot of information. I love being able to curve this out on 4 after playing the next card here, because then we don't take the 2 damage, which is Lyrial Archer Throne. This is kind of part of your win condition, plus also works well with a lot of the tools we use in this deck. For example, like Crazed Executioner, we don't take the damage on Evo once this is on the board. This kind of turns up the clock on our opponent too, meaning they either have to answer this card at some point, or every turn we're going to just keep dealing 2 to their leader until we slowly win the game that way. Because a lot of this deck actually comes out to either outvaluing your opponent or burning your opponent out once you get them to a low hand size and having these threats on the board that just constantly deal damage to them, this being one of them. All right, I always have trouble with this guy's name, but Omen of Silence here. This card is obnoxiously good. If you get the Necrocharge 10, you get this extra bonus effect on top of it. Otherwise, a lot of the times we want to just straight up Evo this on 3 or 4. On Evo, your opponent discards a random card. It's a 4/4. It's not as good as Crazed Execution in the sense that the card is random, so maybe you hit something that doesn't matter, whereas Crazed Execution will always make it so their next turn is like really hard for them, or you remove something out of their hand that you have trouble answering, like Aegis, for example. But this card was really cool too, because it has a secondary effect that on the base form and the Evo form is, while this card is on the field, any spell an opponent plays costs 1 more. One thing to note, because this is such a brand new card, make sure to keep track of this and make sure your opponent is playing the correct amount of play points for their cards, especially if this is early on, the first time they're playing into this. They will make mistakes and not realize that to pay more for certain removal cards or for certain spell cards, which can kind of mess up their turn. What's nice about this too is if you do the Evo on 3 for this with the Evo point, your opponent's turn 4 play, if they want to surefire bullet this, it costs 3, which basically takes up their entire turn, which is obnoxiously annoying. Playing 2 of Craving Splendor. I like this card a lot. It's a 3 cost, deal 4 damage, heal 1. Feels very, very good every time I play this card. I like this card a lot as like a neutral removal if you're just looking for good generic removal to put into a deck. The extra healing too helps a bit because sometimes we still do take damage, even though we have the whole Lero package going on here. Next, 3 of Path to Purgatory. So in this deck, a lot of times when you have the Archer out, this is just a pay 3, draw 3 card and take up 1 slot on your board. It still has a secondary effect of whenever you start of your end phase, if you're at 6 or less life, you can blow this up to deal 6 damage to the enemy board, which is good. Though a lot of times if you're at that point, I feel like you're going to lose the game anyway, but it comes up occasionally into like sword and stuff. When people go really wide, the deck does have issues sometimes if you don't draw the right removal at the right time. Boards get kind of too wide for you to deal with. Path of Purgatory helps out in that, but the big thing here is it draws 3 cards and you don't take 3 damage most of the time as long as you have the Archer out, which is pretty big. In the mirror match, this is huge because a lot of times it feels like the first person to draw PTP kind of wins the match from there. And then it's just really, really good value. So when you get into the later turns, when you yourself are on like a 2 to 3 card hand top decking this, when you're at like 7+ play points, feels super good because most of the cards that you do play usually cost between like 3 or 4 or less in this deck, which is really big. So this card is just really, really good in combination with the Archer, and it's a great draw engine and not having to actually sack our own cards with Soul Conversion. Apostle of Silence, this is honestly one of your big boss monsters of the deck. This is kind of how you win most of your games or pressure your opponent a lot. Because the fact that your opponent will most of the time have 3 or less cards in their hand, that means the effect at the end of the end phase, they'll take 3 damage over and over again. So as long as this body stays on the board, it's dealing a lot of damage. A lot of times too, when this comes out, you kind of don't want to swing with it unless you have to, just so that there's a 5 out on the board that's kind of awkward for them to deal with. So they have to use kind of spells to remove it or something like that, because they can't just run followers into it. We play 3 of the Evo. Like I said, this card I feel is very important about winning your games because a lot of times later in the game we want to pressure our opponent's life total, because not only is the Archer Throne going to start dealing 2 damage, this is also going to start dealing 3 damage a turn, which means we're basically dealing 5 damage a turn, doing a lot of pressure to our opponent's life total. On top of, most of the time, this is not going to deal the 3 damage on Evo. It's actually just going to straight up destroy an enemy follower, which is really important because when we start getting into the point where our opponent's just top decking over and over again, we want something to answer any big follower they just slam on the board. Because when they're top decking, they're just going to play whatever card they draw, because if they don't play it, they know you're going to force them to discard it. So they need to just start playing everything to the board they can. That means Apostle of Silence comes down, blows up their card, and they just have nothing once again, and you're sitting with this 5/5 on the board that's dealing 3 damage every end phase, which is huge. First turn it comes out, deals 3 damage to your opponent, pass to them, they can't answer it, goes back to you, this deals 8 damage the next turn. So we're pushing 11 damage over the course of 2 turns with 1 card, which is obnoxiously powerful in my opinion. Soul Dealer, not only does this combo well with Archer, since we don't take the damage on play from the fanfare, which is huge. That means this becomes a straight up just heal whatever once we evo it. This is kind of our answer to wide boards. We draw this, play this, eat something, swing into something, and then usually another card has to run into this card to remove it, which is how we kind of deal with our wide boards. So we have 2 of the Evo for it. I would love to run 3, but I think Apostle of Silence is more important to always have the Evo for it, because it honestly is how we win most of our games. Soul Dealer helps a lot, but we don't need it as a 3-of in the Evo deck, in my opinion. Card is insanely good. If you've been playing it since I think set 2 it's dropped, it's just a really good card at answering annoying boards. Silent Purge here. This card I go back and forth on. I like having the ability to just pay for, destroy something, and then destroy a follower, that is, and then having your opponent randomly discard a card, because on curve, going from like 2, 3, 4, doing 3 turns in a row, forcing them to discard a card while also answering their board is pretty huge, because they usually get down to 1 or less cards at that point when you do aggressive plays like that with this card, which I really like. The downside here, it is not quick. It doesn't really destroy amulets on the board or anything like that. It's kind of like a very niche hyper focused destroy a follower and then make my opponent discard a card into that package. So I'm going back and forth on this card a lot. I sometimes feel like maybe execution might be better in this slot, or some kind of quick spell to be able to answer things on our opponent's turn, because a lot of times once you develop a Apostle of Silence on the board with an archer, you can kind of sit on that board and just like use your spells reactively to stop them from doing anything a lot of the times with the extra play points that you have left over each turn later in the game. But this card still feels pretty good. So I've been playing it as a 2 of still. I am not sure if I'm going to cut it to like a 1 of or something, but right now I like the card for what it is. I might find something else later though that could take the spot of it. Finally, our last kind of quote unquote big boss monster for the deck that just kind of plays into the deck archetype itself is Dark Angel Olivia. This coming into play either giving you an Evo point if you're going first, which is pretty big sometimes, but a lot of times this will have you draw a card, opponent discard a card. In the aggro matchups, you heal 3, opponent discards a card. The fact that on 5 we get to do this and have a decently sized body that's like somewhat annoying to deal with, especially when your opponent has very limited resources to work with to remove a 5/5 body on the board, is pretty annoying. It usually gets in for at least a swing or so. So Dow has been a really solid card in the list just because all of its optional effects that you get to choose 2 of just feel very, very good for the deck. It refills your hand, lets you hopefully draw into PTP earlier, so that on turn 6 you can play like Angel plus PTP, which is huge as well. It's quite annoying to deal with as well. So it's just a really good card that synergizes very well with the deck, if I haven't made that clear enough already. So yeah, that is the decklet itself. I've been enjoying this deck a lot. I'm still making tweaks to it here and there, trying to figure out the exact ratios of things I want, but it does feel very, very solid. One thing to note though is it, like I said, it does have a huge weakness to wide boards if you don't just draw the correct answers to the board, especially if you miss early discards and like happen to hit things that don't matter in their hand. That's why I like Crazed Executioner a little bit more than the random discard, because on 3 with Evo point it's pretty big because it kind of disrupts a lot of their turn 4 plays, which I think turn 4 for a lot of decks when we start hitting that turn is when the big spike happens for a lot of decks. Like Flora Fencer comes out on 4 if your opponent's going first and so forth. Things like that on 4 are pretty big. But yeah, with that being said, hopefully you guys like this deck profile. If you do, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that. Let me know what you are doing with Discard Abyss. I really, really enjoy this right now, and I've been testing other things out in this kind of archetype because it's a very fun archetype. And who doesn't want to be the local hand terrorist that when your opponent sits down across and sees you flip Abyss, get upset because they're going to have no hand by turn 4. All right, with that being said, guys, we hope to see you guys in the next video. Later.